Hello and welcome, everybody. Welcome to School of Speech, presented by Speech Therapy PD. I really want to thank everyone for joining me today, and a special welcome to all of those joining from the Speech Therapy PD channel on YouTube. I am Carolyn Dolby, and I am a practicing school-based clinician and your host and guest today for School of Speech. Today's episode is Pediatric Feeding Disorder and Dysphagia at School, Building Stronger Systems for Student Success. And so I'm both the host and the speaker. So before we get started, we do have a little bit of housekeeping. I do want to remind everyone that each episode of School of Speech is offered for 0.1 ASHA CEUs. Let's see. I'm going to start with my disclosures. I am a salaried employee for Portland Public Schools. I get compensated for graduate courses that I teach, and then I also receive an honorarium and I receive compensation from Speech Therapy PD for hosting School of Speech, which I will have to say is my dream job. I absolutely love this. Non-financial, I do consult for school districts across the nation and for you. I'd love to help you guys out too. And thank you so much for listening. It really is close to my heart. I am an ASHA member, and I'm ASHA SIG Special Interest Groups 13, 14, and 16. But I thought it would be good to kind of get to know like my journey, who I am, what I do. I actually started out as in the classroom as a teacher. I worked as a kindergarten teacher for about 8 years before I went back to get a post-bac and then my master's of speech pathology from the university, from Texas Women's University. But I got my teaching credentials in Oregon. I worked for Cypress Fairbanks Independent School District for over 20 years in Texas, and they first as a teacher, then as a graduate student, and then as a seed SLP, and as a campus SLP, and then I moved into being the lead of their dysphagia support SLP for their district. I'm going to let you know, it's a huge district, the third largest in Texas, and we all know Texas is huge. Shout out if anybody's listening from Texas, let me know in the chat if you're out there. And then I most recently have just moved back to Portland, Oregon, where I'm from. If anyone's in Oregon, let me know. And I am working for, like I said, Portland Public School, where I am their dysphagia support speech pathologist they have been calling it their feeding team, but I'm going to talk about why semantics matter in a minute. And it's the dysphagia feeding and swallowing team. So like I said, I started out as a teacher, so I feel like I have a really good perspective when I'm asking staff. I feel like I have a really good perspective. Oh, we got a lot from Austin. I love it. And because I know that we're asking staff to do one more thing, but I think after today, and when I just get to be in front of people, they want to do what we want them to do because they really see the value. And what we're really asking is for students. It's for the care of the students. My goals today, talking about really building your program, and really talking about the roles and responsibilities, and then some ways I'll pepper in ways that you can really streamline it. But I do want to start with basically just some terminology, because I find that we have different words, different meanings for words. And I want to start with the word feeding, right? I feel, and some of this I will try to say when I feel like it's a Carolinism. Like, so for me, I feel that people overuse the word feeding. I feel like there is a dyad the dyad of feeding basically means like feeding yourself, self-feeding, the intake of nutrients and food and beverage, right? And it also means the giving. You're feeding somebody. So you feed yourself, you're being fed, or you're feeding somebody. I guess that's a triad. So that is the act of getting the food or liquid from the plate or the bowl or the cup, from the fork, spoon, straw, sip, suck, right? Getting food into the mouth, feeding, whether it's self-feeding, being fed, or feeding somebody. And then the term swallowing is, as we know, as speech pathologists, have three stages: oral, pharyngeal, and esophageal. This is not going to be a lesson on that. I'm just getting us up to speed. And 4 phases is what we say. So, the oral preparatory, oral transit, then pharyngeal and esophageal. I like to remind us all of the 5th phase, which is actually the pre-oral phase. And I know that this kind of muddies the water, but I think it's really important to talk about that pre-oral phase, because that's really the pre-party. I don't have a job unless a student is getting food in, right? I can't do anything unless students are able to get food in. So the pre-oral starts with basically the body functions, right? You have to have a cycle of hunger and thirst, your sensory system, your cardiac, your ability to breathe, right? As we know, our bodies will always choose breathing over anything else, because if we're not breathing, we're not here. And so I do include that pre-oral phase. And so I do say feeding and swallowing, and because you can't really have one without the other. They go hand in hand. All right. And then I know I mentioned, dysphagia and feeding disorder. I am going to do my first link. Let me see how well I do this. I'm just hoping this is going to work for me, and it's not. So I'm going to put it in this way. I'm going to put this in the chat right now. There's a website called Feeding Matters. It's www.feedingmatters.org. Let's spell right. And they are a wealth of knowledge on all things pediatric feeding disorder. But here's the skinny. They define pediatric feeding disorder as impaired oral intake. Oh, this is important. So listen to this part. Okay, so I just said impaired oral intake. That is not age appropriate. I didn't say chronological age. I didn't say developmental age. I mean chronological age. And it is going to be associated with one or more of these 4 areas: medical, nutritional, feeding skill, or psychosocial. And for today, we could do a whole nother one just on pediatric feeding disorder. Maybe we will. But for today, I want you to have the link. Thanks, Neela. I'm glad you got the link. To please go and take a look at it, because it's so helpful. And then swallowing, again, dysphagia, right? Any of those 4 phases, 3 stages, 5 phases, because I really do think that we need to incorporate all of that into our practice as school-based clinicians. I do want to touch on educational relevance, because I have worked in Texas and now I'm working in Oregon, but I have contracted out across the country, from New York to Oregon now, and moved here. And I do hear some chatter that feeding and swallowing can't be done in the schools. And I am here to debunk that myth, because not only does ASHA, and it is in our scope and sequence, but also there is IDEA. I'm going to talk about IDEA with that as well, that schools must keep their students safe. students are required to go to school, right? I mean, parents can choose to homeschool or go to private school. That's okay, but school is mandatory, and we provide a free and appropriate public education for students with special needs. And although IDEA does not say outright, we asked, I'm not sure, not me personally, like the we that be requested that dysphagia be stated in the IDEA paperwork, but their response to that was, actually, we feel that it is already addressed under related services, health related services. And that really helps us actually when we're like bringing this to our district. If you don't already have a process in place for providing feeding and swallowing care to your students, it is required that all students are safe, that all students are adequately nourished and hydrated in order for them to be able to sustain their school day. They need to be efficient. They need to be able to eat their meal in a timely manner. And also, lastly, they need to be social. So you aren't eligible to be safe in the schools. That is a God-given right. Okay. So students that may need dysphagia support or feeding and swallowing support, and I do use those kind of interchangeably, so bear with me on that one, are students that are not safe during meal times, that have inadequate nutrition and hydration, that are inefficient and aren't able to be social. They have that right, because we want to provide environments where where safe feeding practices are being provided, that our practices are also facilitating efficiency, promoting that adequate attainment of calories and liquid, and both solids and liquids, and fostering socialization. And I know that sometimes I feel like I get on a what do you call that, a pedestal on this, or a high horse, but this is what I say to staff when I because I do a lot of training. And I say, what is if you polled all the students in the class, all the students in the school, what is your favorite part of school? I would hazard to take the guess that most of them are going to say lunch and recess, because they don't have an adult telling them what to do all the time. I think sometimes we lose a little bit of our focus when we're working with our special needs students, and we aren't giving them that brain break, just a break from an adult. Quite frankly, they have the right to have a break, talk with their friends, be friendly, be social. And so it's really important that we are providing that space for them. Now, here is a question that I really do think is why some school districts or even a state might say, no, we aren't going to be addressing feeding in the schools. Okay? Because this is the question you might be asked. Do you provide feeding therapy? Right? I bet everybody's like, okay, Carolyn, please give me your answer. And guess what? I, Carolyn Dolby, come from a place of yes, more specifically, oh, heck yeah, that I needed to find a yes to this request. And my answer is yes. Yes, we provide feeding and swallowing services to all students that require feeding and swallowing intervention in order to maintain safety, to facilitate efficiency through the shaping of positive behaviors and improving swallowing function while fostering feeding independence. And I want to highlight the word require. All parents would love for their students to eat broccoli. That is not the goal of school, that students eat broccoli. However, it is our duty, if the child is unable to eat broccoli and we have broccoli on the menu, then we need to address it. But we aren't, yes, we provide feeding and swallowing interventions. And I'm going to tell you how we do that in a minute. But it's the students that require it. The same goes for speech therapy itself. All students would benefit from the services of a speech pathologist, right? But we only provide services that are educationally relevant for that particular student. And so our services are a little bit different in the schools. And so I say, yes, those that require it. So you might be asking yourself, hey, Carolyn, well, what do you mean by what are these services? Because I think we really need a clear answer, and I have it for you. And I'm actually air quotes because I wrote this, and I stand behind this. Okay, so what do I mean about dysphagia feeding and swallowing services in the schools? This is what I mean: utilizing specialized clinicians, providing student-centered feeding and swallowing interventions, supported by well-trained staff, following standardized procedures. I do know that that is a mouthful, but that's exactly what this podcast is going to be about. All of those steps. Utilizing specialized clinicians. What do I mean by student-centered interventions? I'm glad you asked because I'm going to get there too. And supported by well-trained staff and standardized procedures. So let's get into some of that. Let's start with the standardized procedures because I think that's where we need to start. If you are in a district and you do not have procedures in place, where do we even start? I'm going to give you another link to Okay, Emily Homer is my spirit animal. I love her. Emily Homer, if you put in that link, you will get to a place called Students Eat Safely. Students Eat Safely. And she literally, she's amazing, has every piece of paperwork you will need to get your program started. But for our purposes today, I want to kind of go through it, and I like to make it simple. Here's what we need, okay? You need 4 things. First, you need a protocol for identifying students at risk. We need to know what we're dealing with. We need to have a provision for intervention. We need a process for collaboration. And then we need a procedure for training. So let's get into that. Well, you know what? I'm gonna talk about the elephant in the room. Okay. Some of you, maybe not you because you guys are here, but there's people out there, and there's just some like common concerns when we're wanting to keep our kids safe. I don't know why there's a concern of like why, starting a district-wide procedure for keeping our kids safe. They have concerns with ensuring safety of the student. They want to know about educational relevance. What are the ethical responsibilities? And is there a fiscal note? Is there expenses for this? Now, I understand that putting a district-wide process in place, it seems daunting, but hopefully after today, it's going to be a lot more attainable and something that you can bring back to your administrators. So I've already talked about educational relevance, and ASHA has that written out very well on their website as well. So what else? Ethical responsibilities. I'll get into that. We are obligated to honor our ethics. I'm going to lean on collaboration a little bit later. And then when we're talking about cost, I'm really going to talk about ways of using existing staff, talking about the resources that we already have on hand, and that ways that we can improve our plans, our treatment plans, that will improve dysphagia outcomes by focusing on the students themselves and their feeding competencies, all the while maintaining safety. Of course, that's our first concern, but in ways that is not going to break the bank. So there are, I just want to go into lightly, the models of dysphagia and feeding and swallowing support. Depending on your school size, really might depend on how you set up. There's different ways and models. For example, you might be in a small district and you just have a few schools. And so maybe you have a school-based team on each campus. That's great. The benefit if you have a school-based is that you have ongoing monitoring because the people are there every day. And they have access to you and you have access to them. So that ongoing monitoring. Now, the challenge really is staffing because you need to have everybody up and running, everybody trained on all your campuses. So that might not work in a larger district or a district that is more spread out. You might go with a district based team. And the benefit of having a district, like a traveling team. So you have a district-based team that travels to the different campuses. What's great is that you have a specialist, and that you just need to train a smaller group of people. The challenge with that would be staffing, making sure that you have those specialists that can travel to the different campuses. Now, you might be in a district that maybe you have some campuses where you have SLPs that have the specialty and OTs as well. So some of your campuses might have their own district team or their own campus team, and then you might need to. Did I not do it? Is an M. I'm sorry, Kathy. Thank you. There is. So sorry. Here it is. www.emilymhomer.com. Thank you for seeing. I'm sorry, y'all. But okay. I want to finish on the combination team. So if you have some on site and then you have some traveling, that is great because you're utilizing the staff that you have on hand. But the only challenge you might find with that setup is continuity of care. And I want to talk about kind of what I am proposing. No matter what your district wants to do, I really feel that using a dysphagia support SLP, and I'm going to tell you why, even more so, I strongly stand behind this, that somebody like me in your district that focuses just on all things feeding and swallowing. That's all I do. Well, that's not true. That's not all I do. Hold on. I'm going to tell a fib for a minute, but I'll go back on that. All I do, let's say all day, every day is feeding and swallowing, right? I am specialized. I am centralized, and I am standardized. So I am the one clinician that the district needs to support getting my CEUs, getting my training. I have to get my own CEUs to keep my accreditation anyway. So I, get all of them in feeding and swallowing. And I also provide trainings for such. The challenge is having trained staff. And so I think it's less daunting for a whole district if no matter what model you want, whether you want school-based model or the district model or the traveling model or the combination model, that you have at least one specialized clinician and an SLP, because this is part of our scope and sequence, that is completely in charge of the program and has all of the competencies, because I think one of the biggest scare for people is that swallowing is scary. Dysphagia is scary. It is that one area of our practice where we can really do harm when we don't know what we're doing. And so we do need to have the competencies. And one of the pushback I have gotten when I have talked to agencies is that, well, wait, I'm a school-based clinician. Yes, you are, but you are an SLP, CCC-SLP. And but wait, but I've been practicing for 20 plus years and I didn't have that in school. No, you didn't. But I challenge you with this. Are you providing the same type of therapy for your children on the autism spectrum that you did 20 plus years ago? Are you still doing a goal for eye contact? I hope not. You are up to date. We have to be up to date on the current trends to support neurodiversity affirming practices. And it's the same with feeding and swallowing, is that it is part of our scope. But if you can go to your district and show how having a specialized clinician in charge of that, it's so much easier to train one person fully than it would be training a whole district. I get that. So that's why I'm promoting a district support SLP at the district level. And I absolutely love it. And so you might be going, well, hey, Carolyn, what do you do all day long? All the things all day long. Basically, I identify, treat, collaborate with feeding and swallowing services. I establish and maintain the dynamic feeding and swallowing plans, more on that to come. I collaborate with classroom staff. I collaborate with school dysphagia teams. I consult with health services, the nurses, and food services. I collaborate with all campus staff. I try to attend meetings as much as I can. It's not always realistic, but I try. I am a liaison between the campus and food services. Like I said, I try to participate in meetings as much as I can. It's helpful now that we do so many virtually, so sometimes I can just jump in and jump out. And one of the biggest things I do is trainings. Train. So in a nutshell, like what I like to say that I do is I like to teach, treat, and train, right? I teach our procedures like I'm going to talk about today. I treat our students through dynamic feeding and swallowing plans, and I train. I could write a beautiful feeding and swallowing plan, but if it's totally dead in the water if staff are not trained on the mechanics of it. So even though, yes, I am the head of the feeding and swallowing department of me, I can't do it alone. But I feel like I am shouldering some of the worry for people when they know that they have me. And so now you listening, you have me too. I love to collaborate if you have questions for me. Excuse me, going forward. But I remind my districts every year that every school actually does have a dysphagia team. They just sometimes forget that they're on it. I know that it sounds funny, but everybody that is working with students during meal times and snacks is on the team. Who's on our team? Well, we have the family, of course. And what do we need from family? Well, we need them on board because they're the ones that are going to be giving us the medical history, their feeding and swallowing recommendations, and history of how it's being done at home. And I want to stop for a second. I do want to know how feeding and swallowing is happening in the home, but I also need to let the parents know that school is a different setting, and we don't always do exactly what parents do at home in the school setting. For example, if a parent says, I cradle my child and I feed them cradled in the nook of my arm. Well, we can't do that in the school setting, and we know why. So we have to find something that could mirror that or reshape the behavior differently. Now, of course, if a student needs something specific, for example, if a student is bottle fed, yes, they can be bought. That's a question I get. Students can't bring a bottle to school? Yes, actually they can if that's their only vessel. Do we then have some work to do to maybe get them off the bottle if that's safe? Yes. Okay. So family, number one. Nursing, we've got all the nurses. So what I have found now that I'm in a different district, when I was in Texas, every school in my district had a nurse on staff. And you know what? Sometimes you think that your real is real for everyone. Guess my surprise, now that I'm in a different district, they do not have nurses every day on campus. They have health assistants that are supported by a nurse, but a nurse has several different, several campuses that they're going to daily. So there isn't a nurse on each campus every day. So we'll need to think about that when we're looking at the way you're going to do your team. The speech pathologist, that's us. And we are the ones that should be doing this because it is part of our scope. The occupational therapist, yes. I befriend all of them. They're my go-to for adaptive equipment. Along with the physical therapist, they're also on the team. We need our students to be physically supported. Sometimes they need special seating systems. Sometimes they need adaptive equipment in order to be safe for their feeds. You've got to have food services. They need to realize that they're part of this team. What I love about my new district that I'm in, everyone eats for free. I don't know if that's anywhere else, but absolutely everybody can eat for free in Oregon. I bless Oregon. I love it. I work very closely with the head of their nutrition services to let them know the needs of my students, and also to understand when staff members are needing something that is not off the line, or if it's off the line but not adhering to the federal regulations. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Then of course we've got to have admin support, administrators. They have to be supporting our program, because we do need them on board and understand that I know I said there isn't a cost, but there is a cost for trainings and getting those competencies. And when you have the support of your district, and the understanding of the benefit of you coming back and sharing that wealth of knowledge, they pay for one person and you come and share that. That's cost effective in my eyes. And then of course the VIP, of course, is the student. We need to be doing what is best for students, not necessarily, we don't do just what parents or student wants, right? We do what is best and appropriate, because students in special ed have the right to FAPE, the provision of FAPE, which is free and appropriate public education. And I need to say the A in FAPE is appropriate. I know we all thought it was awesome, because that's what we are. We are awesome, and we do provide awesome, but I have to remind myself that it's what is appropriate. And so just because we want something, it might not be appropriate in the school setting. Okay, enough on that. Okay, so I want to streamline our procedures, right? So when I talk about the protocol for identifying at-risk students, you might, sorry, I got myself a little wrapped around my head on what I was going to talk with this. So we need a way to identify students. And when you first get started, it's very overwhelming. And I get it, to be able to ask, to poll schools and such. So be easy on yourself. What I do, what works for me in both of my districts, is I put together a video. I used to do it in person everywhere, but I was running ragged and I got smart. I put together a quick, I think it's about a 10-minute video that is describing what is dysphagia. I go through, talk about what the normal swallowing, bite, chew, swallow, the whole thing. I go through what the typical, the normal swallow process. Then I talk about what are those red flags to look for. And then I talk about the building of a feeding and swallowing plan. And I have 8 building blocks for a feeding and swallowing plan I'll get into. And then at the end of that, I give them a way to get in touch with me. In Texas, I just gave them my cell phone number. I didn't think about that. And just said, text me. No, email. You need it. So don't do that. Email, have them email you. Now in Oregon, what I love is that there is actually a Google referral form that they can fill out. And there's a link on my email for my staff to do a referral that way. But I love just send me an email that you need some help and with a student that you have a concern. Then let's see where we're going. So when we're identifying those kids, if you get a call, we need to have some sort of screening, right? And what works for me, being that I am the dysphagia support speech pathologist for the district, is I schedule a time for me to come out and observe. And I want to observe their current feeding system. Because sometimes it might be an easy fix because it's the feeding portion of the feeder that's providing the feeding that needs some training, and all of a sudden we are not having a problem anymore. Sometimes it's positioning, but other times it's bigger than that. But for the most part, people, the students that we serve, 3 to 21, for the most part, students are already identified. School-age students usually have an identification of a feeding and swallowing problem before they've come to school, because do you know what? School does not cause dysphagia. I know, I'm just as surprised as you. Okay, I know that's being a little cheeky, but coming to school does not create a feeding and swallowing problem. But what it might do is highlight that there actually is a problem, but maybe what is natural or typical for that family, for that student, they didn't realize that there's actually support for that student. Now, the word dysphagia may not be in the paperwork, but I talk that video that I do at the beginning of every year. That's not just for speech paths. That's for the entire district. I mean, the entire district, the entire campus, because I need admin. I need your case managers seeing this. I need them to be like, oh, I need to start looking at this and start asking the question upon intake. Easy. Are there any feeding and swallowing concerns? Is there any certain way or a special way that your student eats? Are there any dietary preferences or restrictions? Having that conversation. So that screening referral can happen upon intake by asking the questions. And I find that if we don't ask the question, a child might not be identified, and then I have a whole district says, oh, we don't have any kids with issues. I'm like, probably because you didn't ask. And the parent is sending food for them and no one's asking. So ask the question first. And then on intake, ask the question. 2, then paperwork review. I can't possibly review the paperwork of every single child that is coming to every single campus. I had 95 campuses in Texas, and I've got 85 here in Oregon. It's a lot of campuses. So it's it is the people on the front lines, those case managers. In Texas, it would be called the diagnostician, and in Oregon, it's the case manager. And maybe across the country, you might have someone called an IEP facilitator. There's a lot of names for the people that are reviewing the paperwork. They need to have knowledge that what they need to look for. It's easy if the word dysphagia is in there. I'll bet you don't, whatever. No, I'm not going to bet you. I can't bet. But I will say this. I am pretty sure that most of the time the word dysphagia might not be in there as in the paperwork, unless we have the nice medical with dysphagia as a diagnosis. However, anything related to feeding and swallowing anywhere in the paperwork is worth, hey, let's check it out. So we start with that. So the first one is that identifying the needs of the students, and that's through your review of paperwork and then through an observation. So the next part is great. All right, so now we have a student coming in that has been identified that has some feeding and swallowing concerns. That's another great reason to have someone like me. I could then reach right out to the parent, start talking to the parent with the questions that I need to ask. For our littles that haven't been in school before, I can actually write a plan via what the parent has told me over the phone or in person or in virtual or however. I will write a temporary plan, but I will always follow it up to make sure that that is actually needed once they are in school, because sometimes, again, we're a different setting. Okay, so it's sometimes kids come with us and they have they come to us and you ask the parent and there is nothing. No, they eat great. They eat everything. There's nothing in the medical because they okay, I'm not going to be judgy. I'm sorry. I really don't. I really strive to always, one of my trainings I do is called Dining with Dignity, and I really, so no judgment here. When a parent has taken their child to the doctor and the doctor says, oh, they look well maintained. Oh, how are they eating? Oh, they eat everything I give them. But what the doctor didn't ask is, are they eating the table food as you eat like a family? They don't ask that, because when they come to school, oh yeah, he eats everything. And then when you open up the lunch kit, everything's pureed. The parent didn't lie. No. But the parent, they eat absolutely everything, but it has to be pureed. And so sometimes that happens, and sometimes we are the first line. And so most of the time we don't have to do a full-blown feeding and swallowing evaluation. But in a case like this, when there's just no paperwork, nothing anywhere, then we might need to do a feeding and swallowing evaluation. I can't go through that today, but I was thinking that I will do another podcast maybe next season focusing on doing those evaluations. Shameless plug, I did do a 2-hour webinar for ASHA, but that is for pay. So hopefully I'll get a podcast on how to do an evaluation. Another one I get asked is, we need physician's orders. We do not need physician's orders to as speech pathologists because of our credentials. We do not need physician's orders in order to provide evaluation or treatment of feeding and swallowing, because we are speech language pathologists, and feeding and swallowing is under our scope of practice. So no, we do not. All right, I am to the part where I want to talk about intervention. And I think, again, this is what scares people, because people think that we are going to be a feeding clinic and we're going to have a goal. No, we don't. You can if you want, but that's not how I play. My intervention is the development of a dynamic feeding and swallowing plan. Okay? It is not just a feeding plan. It is a feeding and swallowing plan. And here are the 8 building blocks. Okay? You need to have the level of support that is needed, the environment, dietary modifications, cultural preferences, positioning, equipment, feeding techniques and strategies, and precautions. So let me go through those. So when we're looking at supervision, I have found that people think that having one-on-one supervision, if the student has an issue with feeding and swallowing, that they must have one-on-one supervision, a one-on-one staff member. That is not true. That is the most restrictive environment for a student. Now, there is a reason and there is a case for, I do have some that must have one-on-one supervision because they are an aspiration risk. Now, some students have behavior or a medical reason that they have a one-on-one. I'm not talking about getting rid of that. But when but when I am looking at a student's need, one-on-one is my last go-to. Because again, students need a break. They need a break from an adult. And so I like to give supervision like this. I do have one-on-one supervision, but this is when they need maximum support for everything, and they are at serious risk for choking and aspiration. Okay. My next one up from that is I use supervision by a trained feeding facilitator with constant monitoring. So not one-on-one. They can be seated with their peers and their friends, but there is a trained feeding facilitator that is constantly monitoring that student. The next one above that would be supervision by a trained feeding facilitator with close monitoring. Maybe the student is a self-feeder, or maybe assisted self-feeder, and perhaps that feeding facilitator has a group of students that they're assisting, and they can be providing some close monitoring of that student. And then if they need a feeding plan, there needs to be a trained feeding facilitator. That doesn't mean, so I might say supervision by trained feeding facilitator, but the student is independent once you set it up. Maybe they just need to make sure that they have their adaptive equipment, and make sure that their food is modified correctly. Then they are good to go, but they need to have a trained feeding facilitator to be watching, not necessarily on them, but to know that they have a feeding plan and what needs to be on that feeding plan. Now, environment. So our goal is that all children eat with their peers in the least restrictive environment. No one eats alone. No one should be in the basement of the school. So, however, we do need to change the venue for some of our kiddos that have maybe some sensory issues, or maybe they're building a skill. And so I might need to say, provide a less distractible environment. Now, when we're talking about meal modifications, we want to adopt IDSI, www.iddsi.org. IDSI, the International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative. And that has been a game changer. So I don't have time today to go through it, but let me just tell you just one thing. Soft and bite-sized is so much more palatable than mechanically altered or mechanically softened, right? Soft and bite-sized, you can get parents on board just from that alone. You notice that I also said cultural preferences. Yes, I do honor those on the feeding plan, because a lot of times our children that require a dysphagia plan also cannot advocate for themselves. And a lot of them may have a communication disorder. And so they're not able to say, I only eat halal. Okay, don't get this twisted though. The school does not, so it's not going to be listed on their emergency allergy, but I do list it on the plan that only meats from home permitted. Because if a student eats halal, our school district, I know both my districts I worked in, we did not have halal meats. So we just had to omit those meats because so we don't go out and get halal. That's not what we're here for. But we will make sure that that's not presented to your child. The next one is posture and positioning. I acquiesce again to the team. Our OTs and PTs, this is their place to jam. So that's why they are indeed part of the group. Because the next one is adaptive equipment. Again, OT and PT, part of our group. Then we've got our feeding techniques and strategies that are individualized for each student. Just like a chin tuck is not given to everybody, that we wouldn't say that universally everyone needs to chin tuck. That is absolutely ridiculous, right? So our techniques and strategies have to be specific for that child. And if you can't say why they need to do it, the staff will not do it, right? There needs to be a why of why we're asking them to do something different. For example, if maybe one of the strategies is, I like to call it a bolus chaser, just when I'm talking to the staff because it's fun. But maybe you want them to do, or professionally you might call it cyclical ingestion, or you might call it a liquid wash, or on your plan you might state, please encourage a sip of liquid every 2 to 3 bites. And the staff might go, oh, that sounds like a good idea. But if you say, actually, that's clearing their oral cavity and it's keeping them, for that student, it might be clearing the oral cavity. For a different student, so you're going to say they need that because they're clearing their oral cavity and it's keeping them safe. Another student, they might need to have that strategy, but it's because it increases their internal pacing. So you're not constantly saying, no, don't take another bite. Wait. You can just say, oh, take a sip. Even having a point or a tap to not interrupt their meal. And it gets them used to pacing themselves. We do that ourselves. That's how we pace ourselves. So all the strategies should be for that student alone. And this just reminded me, those of you that are already doing feeding and swallowing plans, back in season 1, I think it's episode 12, I actually go through all of those strategies. So if you're wanting more, School of Speech is where to be, people. And it's you can find it either on Speech Therapy PD, or put in School of Speech Dysphagia, and it will be on podcast for you. So there you go. And of course, we need to have precautions and emergency plans. We need to have a plan in place for choking and aspiration, right? And so then the last part, and I'm realizing, wow, today went by faster than I thought. But I love it so much, guys, is the training part. We've got to train everybody on everything, for everyone. So, okay, so the 3 parts, you need to identify your kids, right? And you need to have your protocol for identifying. And I gave you a trick, which is put together a video that, like I just said, I don't need to go over that. Then 2, you need intervention. Your intervention is, hear it, that feeding and swallowing plan. And it is dynamic. It is a living document. So this is another time saver. If the student comes in and it's written anywhere, or the parent tells you that they have feeding and swallowing, boom, put together your feeding and swallowing plan. Boom. Parents have already given permission for special ed services. It's part of the special ed services of keeping them safe. Okay. Then the 3rd prong is the training. I know what I wanted to give you. You need to train your cafeteria manager what do I want to give you? I wonder if I can, it's the USDA law. And I just realized, I don't know if I can get that. I'm not going to be able to I was hoping to cut and paste it. I wonder if there's another way. Oh, hold on. Control V. No, control copy. Sorry, y'all. Thank you so much. I want to put this, if this works, I'm going to be so happy. Hot diggity dog diggity. Oh my gosh. Okay. Game changer. Do you know that there's a law? Well, regulations, I guess, more so. Regulations that dictate that all campus cafeterias that partake in the free and reduced federal funding for the free and reduced meal program must provide modifications for students with disabilities that cannot eat what's directly coming from the line. Yes, people, it's there in black and white. Cafeterias must make those modifications. I'm not playing. So what worked in my district in Texas is because our meals were central. Our meals were sent from our central food production to the campuses every day. So we actually curated a dysphagia menu that was offered in puree, minced and moist, and soft and bite-sized. And those went hot, fresh daily. I'm in a different district now, I'm in a different state, and that doesn't happen that way. So the campuses, the modifications are being happened from what's on the line and modified from the staff. So I'm doing training with the staff on how to make those modifications. Where I come with this law, for example, if there's not something on that line that can be modified, you can't puree bread, y'all. So then I say we need to have alternatives. And I show them, and I'm so nice about it too, because we want to work with them. And so for example, in high schools they have a bunch of different lines, and basically they say when the line you get in, you get everything from that line. I say not our kids. We can choose things from any of the line, and we put our meal together that way. So maybe we want to get the tomato soup that's offered on that day because they're having grilled cheese and tomato soup. So we're like, oh, that's our vegetable and it's already pureed, so I don't need to modify it. I've gotten the soup, but then I want to make sure that I'm getting a protein. So then I go to the burrito bar and I get what I need from there. And then I go to the salad bar where I'm getting fruit that can be modified. And so I'm training the cafeteria, the head of cafeteria, to understand why we need to do this, that it trickles down to the cafeteria managers, because what I tell the staff, no one wants to hear no. And these staff members are having to modify there's a lot on their shoulders. Don't give them any grief. When they have that feeding and swallowing plan, that is the documentation. So for the last minute or so, I want to talk about that. So no, I didn't finish training. Sorry, let me just finish on that. So training cafeteria, then you've got to have a plan in place for training the staff. That written, you should write your plans that anyone can read it and understand it. But what needs to happen is to explain it so they understand that if they don't do it, what would happen. When they know if they don't provide this strategy, they don't provide the food modification, the repercussions of it and the ethical responsibilities, we get everybody on board, and they will I hopefully would adhere to it with fidelity when they understand the why. So our training really is for understanding the why. And then where did I want to go from there? Oh, documentation. My goodness. Okay. All right. Here's my cheat. Not my cheat, but my way of making things easier. So in I call it the IEP. In their IEP documentation, in their present levels, I write a blurb about how they require their individual dynamic feeding and swallowing plan. You can name it whatever you want. And I indicate that that they have a plan, and I always say, please reference most recent plan for additional details. The reason I don't write out the entire plan in the present levels, because guess what? Our goal is to get them off a plan. So then I added as an accommodation on the accommodation page, feeding, like where I'm at now, we call it a safe eating plan, a SEP, a safe eating plan. In accommodation, it says safe eating plan SEP across the entire school day, all staff members, because those specials and all the teachers get the accommodations page. And if they don't know what it is, they need to ask. And so that will ensure the fidelity of the plan and that it's an accommodation. And the reason I don't write it out, because if I had something really like the student must, have soft and bite size, and we're moving them up to regular, easy to chew, we would have to come back and amend that IEP, because if it was written as such, then we would have to go back, and we don't have time for all those meetings. So we can change the feeding and swallowing plan when we have it, they have one. Please refer to their most recent that is uploaded. And then the training part is when you do change the feeding and swallowing plan, the staff needs to be retrained on it and signed off on it. I can't believe that our hour is done. I want to thank everyone for hanging in there with me. I definitely will do another podcast that would be on how to do a feeding and swallowing evaluation, and for the schools, because it is different. We are a different animal. I want to thank everybody for joining me today. I really hope that you like School of Speech, and I want you all to join me in the next episode as well. Thank you so much, and reach out to me through Speech Therapy PD. I mean it. I love to collaborate, so I want to help you. So thank you, and bye, guys. Bye. Thank you.